Street United Methodist Church in Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Wesley Bible class. And we are studying Numbers 8 and possibly getting into chapter 9 as well. Um, we're still in really the Exodus. This is just another version of what was going on during the Exodus. It picks up really kind of at the end of Exodus. But they're still setting up the arrangements for worship, setting up arrangements for the tabernacle, for the tent of meeting, delineating who's going to do what, getting people prepared to do the jobs that they have. And so we're going to get into this just a little bit. Some of this is going to sound a little technical as we go into it, but the implications for us today, there are still implications for us today as Christians from some of the ordinances and procedures that they used back then. So let's take a look. Chapter 8. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you set up the lampstand," when you set up the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand. Aaron did so. He set up its lamps to give light in front of the lampstand, as the Lord had commanded. Now this was how the lampstand was made, out of hammered work of gold, from its base to its flowers. It was hammered work according to the pattern that the Lord had shown Moses, so he made the lampstand. All right, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a menorah. The lampstand is a menorah, and it's got 7 lamps on it. It's built like a tree, and it represents, speculative, okay, but it represents the tree of life and God's creative abilities. So there's 7 lamps on the menorah. Now we're getting into the season of Hanukkah right now, and Hanukkah is a 7-day event, and 1 lamp is lit each day. Some people think that it's equivalent to our Christmas. It is not. The celebration of Hanukkah is based on when the Maccabees ejected the Greeks from Israel, and they had a revolt. The Greeks were horrible. They were revolting themselves. We look in Western literature and everything and say, oh, the Greeks were really great for Western civilization. Well, that's not really, no, don't go with that. The Greeks were horrible people, and they're very oppressive. They outlawed Judaism. They sacrificed a pig on the altar in the temple, contaminated it as much as they could. And finally, the Maccabees were able to eject the Greeks. And when they did, they tried to restore and cleanse the temple. Well, part of that, the revolt broke the nation. They didn't have, economically, they were devastated. And when they tried to restore it, they, of course, brought in the menorah. And the menorah had a limited amount of oil to it and to run the lamps. And God kept the menorah going for 7 days.
I thought it was 8.
Well, 8, yeah.
Yeah.
8 days.
It was 8.
Yeah, right.
8 nights of Hanukkah.
Of Hanukkah, right. But anyway, the whole thing was about the fact that God miraculously kept these lamps going when they were restoring the temple. And so it's a celebration of the restoration of Israel and God's blessing on the nation as it transformed. God's endorsement of what the Maccabees did. It's unfortunate the Maccabees were not able to maintain power. Israel was not independent for very long.
So who were the Maccabees? Were they just like a tribe?
They were like a tribe, yeah, but they were very militant, and they were able to bring about a populist revolt that threw the Greeks out. But Hanukkah is the celebration of Hanukkah is the restoration of Israel and the cleansing of the temple. So it's a festive celebration, and so that's what they're doing now. But it is not like our Christmas. People try to make it equivalent because there are lights in Christmas and lights in Hanukkah, but and gifts are given, but it's not considered to be as lavish as. Um, Okay, then you got the consecration and service of the Levites. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the Levites from among the Israelites and cleanse them. Thus you shall do to them to cleanse them. Sprinkle the water of purification on them. Have them shave their whole body with a razor, and wash their clothes, and so cleanse themselves." Okay, so where do we get the ritual of sprinkling in baptism? Okay, this is a precursor to what we do, and one of the legitimizing techniques of baptism. Okay, because you can be cleansed by sprinkling. Now, there's a lot of controversy among Christians today about how, what is a legitimate baptism? Do you have to be immersed, or do you have to be sprinkled, or you have to be poured upon, or what? A lot of the controversy comes out of the fact that Greek is not as precise a language as English. And so they take, it's the incident of John the Baptist baptizing Jesus. And we know that that was in the River Jordan, and that people went down into the River Jordan and were baptized and then came out. Okay, well, the Greeks coming out, the word for coming out can be like, I went to swim in the ocean, I went down into the surf, and then I came out. It doesn't mean I went underwater, it just means I came out of the water. Okay, and coming out of the water could mean that you were immersed, it could mean that you were just splashing around, it could mean that, you stood in the water, somebody poured water over you. But this ancient tradition of cleansing the Levites meant it just took a sprinkling of water it was holy water, and that's what did it. And in the church, we consecrate the water that's used in baptism before we do a baptism. So there is a holy water element, even in Protestant baptisms, that you find. So you want to know where the traditions are and where they came from. They came from this kind of narrative. Then let them take a young bull and its grain offering of choice flour mixed with oil, and you shall take another young bull for a sin offering. You shall bring the Levites before the tent of meeting and assemble the whole congregation of the Israelites. When you bring the Levites before the Lord, the Israelites shall lay their hands on the Levites, and Aaron shall present the Levites before the Lord as an elevation offering from the Israelites, that they may do service of the Lord. So what's happened here is the people lay hands on the Levites, then the Levites go to the priest lay hands on the Levites, and through the Levites, the people are then blessed. There's a connection, okay?
People that laid their hands on Aaron.
Aaron, that was a separate consecration thing altogether for the priests. Yeah,
So is that where we get ordination, where the bishop puts it?
where there's a laying on of hands. Yes.
And in the Baptist church, the people, do they do that?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. They do, but it's a congregation that does it. So that in itself is a tradition that derives from something like this. One of the things that is very important in Christendom is the connectivity in ordination back to when Christ ordained the disciples. And then the disciples ordained people to become ministers in Christendom, okay? So there's supposed to be a connectivity in my ordination that goes all the way back to when the disciples were laying hands. Now, there was a big controversy in the Methodist movement over laying on of hands, okay? Typically, it would take a bishop to lay hands on someone to become a minister, okay? But once a person has been ordained, then that connectivity still exists, whether or not the person holds the office of bishop or not. Okay? So when you Roman Catholic Church, traces its heritage all the way back to the disciples. The laying on of hands takes place all through ordinations in the Roman Catholic Church. And then in the Anglican movement, when Henry VIII broke off from the Roman Catholic Church, the priests who were Anglican had been ordained previously under the Roman Catholic method, so that there was that continuity there. And then they picked it up and moved it on. And then that came into the Methodist movement, because John Wesley was ordained as an Anglican priest. Okay. Now, what John Wesley did was, after the American Revolution, the Church of England couldn't be called that in the former colonies. There would be no English authority, because the king was the head of the church in England. So we totally rejected that. So they had to become the Episcopal Church. So Anglicanism became the Episcopal Church. They're still tied to the Anglican movement. But what John Wesley did was, he knew that there were Methodists in the Anglican Church in the colonies. Once they broke off, he had to have a way of ordaining pastors in America. So what he did was, he laid hands on Francis Asbury and Coke, and sent them off to the former colonies to build up the Methodist movement here. Well, when they got here, the Methodists broke off from the Anglicans, from the Episcopalians, and they had the first annual conference, and at that conference they elected Coke and Asbury as bishops. And when that happened, John Wesley's brother almost walked out on him. He was furious that John Wesley had taken upon himself the authority of a bishop to ordain people who then became bishops over here in a separate denomination from Anglicanism altogether. So anyway, I traced my ordination back to those guys. So the beat goes on, okay? But laying on of hands is very much a part of ordination or consecration for a particular work in a religious element, whether it be Judaism or Christianity. There is an imparting. When Isaac laid hands on Jacob and imparted to him the blessing, okay? Jacob didn't feel right, but Isaac was too blind to know. And it wasn't Esau. But he laid hands on him, imparted the blessing, and that blessing could only be imparted one time, and Esau was out of the picture for that. So the laying on of hands is very much a part of imparting, almost like an estate to someone, but it's an office. Okay. Then the Levite shall lay hands on the heads of the bulls, and he shall offer the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering to the Lord, to make atonement for the Levites. Now, why is he making atonement for the Levites? Well, for any sins that the Levites might have caused, but also for all the Israelites. When you atoned the Levites, you were also atoning all of Israel at the same time. Okay, so this is a rite of purification. Then you shall have the Levites stand before Aaron and his sons. You shall present them as an elevation offering to the Lord. Okay, remember now, the Levites represent the firstborn of all the people of Israel. God looks at the Levites and says, these are, they are the redemption of the firstborn, so that we don't kill them. It's crazy. It goes back to Passover, when the firstborn of Egypt were killed and the firstborn of Israel were protected. Okay, but when God did that, he claimed the lives of all the firstborn of Israel. So he assumed ownership, as it were, of all the firstborn of Israel during Passover. And then in this passage, you're seeing that the Levites represent all of the firstborn of Israel. So when God deals with the Levites, he's preserving the firstborn so that they are of all Israel, so that they are not sacrificed, they are not killed out in Judaism at all. Okay. All right. Thus you shall separate the Levites from other Israelites, and the Levites shall be mine. Thereafter the Levites may go in to do service at the tent of meeting, once you've cleansed them and presented them as an elevation offering, for they are unreservedly given to me from among the Israelites. I have taken them for myself in place of all that open the womb, the firstborn of all the Israelites. For all the firstborn among the Israelites are mine, both human and animal. On the day that I struck down the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated them for myself, but I have taken the Levites in place of all the firstborn among the Israelites. You're going to see as we go into the invasion of Canaan that when something is consecrated to the Lord during the course of that invasion, it is destroyed. It is not kept. So there are places where not only is the population consecrated to the Lord, but all of their assets are consecrated to the Lord, so that they destroy people and property utterly. If it's consecrated to the Lord, it's supposed to be destroyed. And so the Levites are there so that the firstborn of Israel are not destroyed. This is a different kind of God than we're used to, you know?
Complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated. It is complicated, but understand this is I'm going to use the word cult, but that's what it is. It's an ancient cult that was in development, okay? And their understanding of God was very different from our understanding of God today. Okay? It's the same God, it's our understanding that has developed. Okay, whether or not God actually put these kinds of requirements in, it's, but what's going on here is a foundational culture for what will develop. Okay, it's just like you look at the United States, and we go to Williamsburg all the time. We go to Williamsburg, and Williamsburg is in the transition from colony to country. Okay, and what was in the colonies was a foundational culture for what became a country, and that country was very imperfect at its inception. It was actually ungovernable at its inception and included a violation of human rights through slavery and other things as well. So while that was foundational, what the country did was they took the best philosophies, the best desires of what they were trying to do when they established the state of Virginia, and gradually came to understand that these human rights should be universal, that rights of genders should be universal, rights of religion should be universal, but that was a process, okay? This is an inception. This is a founding culture, and it has a lot of flaws. It has a lot of flaws in the way it's administered. It has a lot of flaws in the way that they perceive God. It has a lot of flaws in the way that they understand who is an interlocutor between people and God, how the institutions work and things like that. But they made it workable. That was the thing. There was a process that was workable. And while it was not perfect, and our process today is not perfect, but at least they had something established, and they had a loyalty to God and an understanding of God's loyalty to them that made it workable. And the whole process, what they're trying to do here, because God is extremely holy, God is totally holy, okay? And humanity is not. So what they're trying to do is to find a place where the holy and the corrupt can meet in an acceptable way for both God and people. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get some kind of a linkage to a realm and to a holiness that they don't exhibit themselves. Okay, and God, on God's part, is trying to communicate to these people holiness and that sort of thing, so that they have an aspiration. Okay, when something starts, look at the aspirations of what they're trying to do. Their aspirations and their methods don't link up entirely. Ours don't. We have aspirations as a country right now, and we have a system which is really good, a lot more advanced than most of the systems around the world, okay? But it's not perfect, and we understand it's not perfect. Okay, we're still working to try and get to the aspirations of the originators. Okay. So after God takes the Levites and claims them, I'm going to cut ahead. Once God claims the Levites, he gives them entirely to the priesthood. So the priesthood owns the Levites, in effect, and they direct them. The Levites are not allowed to do more or less than what the priests assign, and only certain parts of the Levites are allowed to do certain parts of the transportation of the tent of meeting and the tabernacle, and only certain parts of the Levites are able to go in and handle that which is in the Holy of Holies. So that's just a delineation. Now, the only Levites who can serve are, this is from verse 23. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, this applies to the Levites from 25 years old and upward, they begin to do duty in the service of the tent of meeting, and from the age of 50 years, they shall retire from the duty of the service and serve no more. They may assist their brothers in the tent of meeting in carrying out their duties, but they shall perform no service. Thus you shall do with the Levites in assigning their duties. So what the Levites can do, the old gray heads, they can tell the young guys how to do the stuff, okay? But they can't do the stuff. They're not allowed to do the stuff themselves. Okay, I kind of wish something like that still applied. This church is working me to death. So I got so many projects going on here. It's like, oh man,
Was this a confusion to those people as it is to us? I mean, how did they keep up with what they had to do, what they couldn't do, and all that?
Oh, they had it written down. And we talked about that last week. I don't think we're going to get into chapter 9. I'm just going to tell you. The Israelites had their own language. The Hebrews had their own language in Egypt. The Egyptian alphabet didn't exist. They had hieroglyphics. So it was something like Chinese, where you have a picture, except that the pictures, it was kind of an alphabet, not exactly like Chinese. With Chinese, you have a character, and the character means a whole word. Okay? With the Egyptians, you have pictures, and the sound of what is pictured is the sound that you use in speaking. So they would line up pictures, and that was like lining up letters. Okay? But it was very complicated, because, each letter was a picture. But some of the stuff that you had from the Egyptians came into the Semites. The Semites developed their own alphabet outside of the Egyptians, and there might have been several reasons for that. One of them was that they did not want to be identified with the Egyptians, or the Egyptians didn't want them to be identified as Egyptians, so they would not want them to be literate in the Egyptian language. However, so much of the heritage of the Hebrews required things to be written down. So they developed an alphabet. And the alphabet there was no lowercase. There were no vowels. It was all consonants. And it was by your familiarity with the word that you would know how to pronounce it. Okay? They didn't put vowel points in until really kind of the 1st century AD, thereabouts. So, paragraphs, any of that. Okay? And you could read it because you had memorized the text, and this is just kind of a reminder as you go along. But they have found from 3,500 years ago, they have found Semitic writing in some of the places where Hebrew slaves were used in caves to dig out turquoise. And so that writing is still on the wall of those caves. And there is a reference to, one of them is a prayer to El, which is the word for God, to remember the slave and to liberate the slave. But that's written on the wall of a cave 3,500 years ago. So, they had a written language back then. And that's how they were able to write this down, all these procedures, okay? Now, granted, you had to have Jewish scholars in Babylon and in the Persian Empire who could read those ancient texts and translate them. And so what we're getting is the translation of a variety of these old scrolls on, you would have a fragment that told the Levites how to do this. You'd have another fragment that told what the priests did. You'd have, so they were putting all of this together, and that's how these books in the Pentateuch were formed. But they were formed in Hebrew. They were not formed in Aramaic, so which the people spoke.
Do the Levites still exist? I mean, back in this, everything was tribal. When it's mentioned somebody, he was from the tribe of so-and-so, and his dad was this, and his granddad. And
it's very hard.
Does that still exist in Israel now, or is it?
It's very hard. It's very hard to identify what tribe a person came from. Okay, my name is Levin, so I would have been from the tribe of Levi, oddly enough. But whether or not that was really true, or where my heritage got scrambled somewhere back in Russia, is hard to tell. So, if you want to trace your entire lineage, it's almost impossible to do, because when you look at the state of Israel right now, these people came from all over the place. They came from all over the place. And what happened to their lineage along the way, from the basis of persecutions that, or cultural oppression. They may not have been able to call themselves by their family names, or, just any number of things could have happened as people tried to eradicate Judaism from society one way or another. So it's really hard to trace things back accurately.
Why is it that the whole world seems to hate the Jews? What's the reason for that?
Well, because they are the people of God, and people who hate Jews hate God. Okay?
People who hate Jews hate God. That's a pretty heavy statement there.
It is. It is. But if your motivation is hatred,
Yeah.
then are you representing the God of love?
No.
No. So if you single out a people of any sort, and your primary motivation against them is hatred, then are you really representing God in this world?
That's what Hamas is, then, right?
Hamas is nothing but hatred and death. It's a death cult.
I never could understand, because I always felt like the Jews were God's chosen people.
Right.
Jesus was a Jew. And all over the world, there's anti-Jewism, even in this country.
Yes. Right. But understand also that it might start with the Jews, but because Christianity came out of Judaism, that hatred easily translates over to Christians as well.
just like with this war now,
Yeah,
the Jews were attacked,
yes.
and the Jews are defending themselves. And if the people are so dumb, the attackers are so dumb, knowing that the Jews are so much stronger and there's a few of them and they attack them, what do they expect? And now that the Jews are out to eradicate Hamas, they're Syrians.
How many of you have brothers and sisters? Okay. And did you ever either strike a brother or sister or get struck by a brother or sister with the expectation that the parents would catch you or them striking back? Okay? So normally parents don't pick it up until the second hit. And they see the aggrieved person doing the hitting. And that's what Hamas is doing. Hamas hit horribly, horribly. And then the Jews strike back and everybody says, oh, look at them killing people, you know? And that's what Hamas is trying to do. Hamas is not strong enough to destroy Israel. But Hamas is strong enough to incite people against the Jews worldwide. Their objective is to make all Jews insecure wherever they live. That's what they want to do.
Well, that's what's happening here.
Yes, and that's what's happening right here. And by the way, the Jews are not as strong as the Christians. Okay? But Hamas has the same thing in mind for Christianity. So we need to pay attention to what's happening to the Jews because ultimately we're next.
When did Muslim religion come to exist? That's history.
Yeah, it came to exist around the 12th century. And Muhammad was heavily influenced by Jewish traders moving through his territory. He traded with them, came to understand this monotheism and embraced monotheism. And because the Jews were the model for monotheism, one of the few outside of Christianity, but the Jews were monotheist, and Muhammad was a polytheist, and he adopted monotheism. Okay, but once he established his religion, and just about so much of the writings of Islam are based on his interpretation of Jewish text. Okay, Hebrew text, Old Testament, and when he came to Jewish communities and wanted them to convert to Islam, which he considered to be an upgrade from Judaism, they refused, and that's when you started seeing very anti-Semitic orientations in Islam, and he basically, attacked Jewish communities and tried to subdue them, convert them by force to Islam. Islam has spread throughout the world primarily by force, not by persuasion. So that's something that we need to be aware of. But then, Christianity was spread the same way for centuries. Judaism had no interest in converting anyone else in particular. Their objective was not to take over countries and convert people by force to Judaism. But Islam and Christianity have that as part of their heritage. And we, as Christians in the 21st century, look at those periods in our history and say, that's not something we want to do again. Okay? Islam hasn't gotten that far. So we'll see what happens. Okay, well, thank you for being here. We'll pick it up at chapter 9. They're going to get going again. They're going to do the Passover, and then you're going to have the cloud and the fire leading the people. So the journey is going to continue. All right. Well, thanks for being with us today. If you have any questions or anything, please, you can email me at revlev at nccumc.org. And I look forward to hearing from you. I really do. God bless you, and Merry Christmas.